Friends, imagine standing in a white world where only snow is spread in every direction. Neither a tree nor a mountain can be seen clearly. There is no path. Both the ground and the sky look like the same color, making it feel as if you are standing alone in the middle of a blank piece of paper. The year was 1997, and the location was a part of Antarctica where research teams visit for only a few months of the year. An international team of 12 people had come here to study glacier movement and the ancient ice layers buried beneath the snow. Their temporary base station was built on a plain of ice, about 320 kilometers inland from the sea. In the beginning, everything was normal. Every morning, they would set up equipment, drill into the ice, collect samples, and record data in the evening. At night, they would sit near the heater, drink coffee, and talk about home. But the most dangerous thing about Antarctica is that the weather changes without warning. On the morning of the 7th day, the color of the sky slowly began to turn from blue to gray. The sound of the wind changed, sounding like a train approaching at high speed from somewhere far away. Experienced scientists understood that this was no ordinary wind, but the beginning of a blizzard. They immediately called everyone inside, shut down the machines, left the drill in the ice, and began retightening the tent ropes. But the storm turned out to be much faster than their preparations. The wind speed reached up to 140 kilometers per hour. Snow was flying as if sand were raining from the sky. It was difficult to keep eyes open. Breathing caused a burning sensation in the throat, and within a few minutes, every sign of the paths they had made disappeared. Then suddenly, the base station's generator shut down, which meant they no longer had heating, light, a way to charge batteries, or the power to operate a satellite phone. The temperature inside began to drop rapidly. Within a few hours, the water pipeline froze. Medicines became as hard as stone, and the food also turned into ice. People's fingers began to go numb, and the steam from their breath was freezing on the tent walls, creating a layer of ice. Team leader Mark realized that if they stayed here, everyone would slowly freeze. He decided they must reach an old supply depot nearby, where thick shelters and extra fuel were kept. According to the map, that depot was about 12 kilometers away, but stepping out in the storm meant challenging death. Still, he tied everyone together with ropes so that no one would wander off and ordered them to move out. As they stepped outside, the wind hit them with such force it felt as if someone had thrown them against a wall. Their bodies leaned back, feet slipped, and there was nothing but flying snow before their eyes. Nothing was clearly visible. They began moving forward, almost crawling while hunched over. With every step, the snow would sink above their knees. They became breathless, and the cold air pierced their lungs like a knife. After a short while, one members. He got stuck in a hidden icy crevice and fell down heavily. The others pulled him out by tugging the rope, but his knee was badly twisted. His face turned pale with pain. Now he was unable to walk. He was laid on a sledge, and the others took turns pulling him. But in the strong wind, the sledge would flip over repeatedly. Snow would accumulate on the ropes, making them heavy as they walked. People's shoulders went numb. A burning sensation started in their feet, and their fingers began to turn blue, a sign of frostbite. The sense of time was lost. No one knew how long they had been walking. The sun was hidden behind the haze, and identifying the direction became impossible. The GPS had shut down in the cold. The compass needle was shivering. One member suddenly felt dizzy. He wanted to stop and sit down repeatedly, but the others knew that sitting meant freezing. Therefore, they kept him standing by force, made him talk, and called out his name so that he wouldn't lose consciousness. The wind had become even stronger now. Sometimes it pushed from behind, and sometimes it blocked them directly from the front. In some places, the snow was so soft that feet would sink up to the waist, and it would take several seconds to get out. Every second drained strength from the body. The condition of the injured companion was worsening. His breathing became fast and shallow. His eyes were half closed, and his lips had turned blue. The rest of the team was also struggling with pain, cold, and exhaustion. Someone had severe pain in their shoulder. Someone's fingers wouldn't straighten, but they still kept moving forward because turning back was now even more dangerous. Suddenly, a high mound of snow appeared ahead, which wasn't on the map. This meant they might have strayed from the right path, but because of the same whiteness everywhere, they couldn't understand which direction was correct. Someone suggested they should stop and decide on the direction, but stopping was no longer safe because their bodies had already reached a dangerously cold level. They decided to keep moving in the direction where the wind felt slightly less strong, as there might be a natural barrier there that could protect them for some time. While walking, another member fell. He was picked up, fell again, and was picked up again. Now even his legs were not supporting him. Strange sounds started coming from his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but words weren't coming out. The team leader realized these are symptoms of severe hypothermia. He shook him intermittently and patted him, but the cold had affected his brain too. Now the same fear was haunting everyone's mind. If a safe place wasn't found soon, perhaps no one would survive. But where is a safe place? No one knew. And amidst this uncertainty, fear, pain, exhaustion, and freezing breaths, they kept moving forward, knowing that every next step might be even more difficult than the last. And perhaps this white plane was going to test them even further. Friends, the situation had become such that walking was no longer just a matter of physical strength, but of sheer will. The wind was still blowing like crazy and snow on the face, as if thousands of needles were piercing. The team members were no longer able to talk much to each other, because opening their mouths allowed the cold wind to rush in and take their breath away. The injured companion's breathing had slowed down even further, and pulling the sledge now seemed almost impossible. Yet 2 people kept pulling the rope with all their might, while the others moved ahead, probing the snow and carving a path. Then suddenly, there was a loud sound, as if someone had broken something underground, and in the next moment, the member walking in front sank down with the snow. Fortunately, because he was tied to the rope, he did not fall completely into the crevice, but half of his body was hanging below. Beneath was only darkness, and a sound like a wind whistle. The others pulled the rope with all their strength. The skin on their hands began to peel, and their gloves had hardened from the ice. But somehow he was pulled out. Everyone realized they had now entered an area where large crevices were hidden under the snow, which are almost impossible to identify from above. This meant that every next step depended on luck. They now began to walk even more slowly, moving forward by tapping the ground with wooden sticks. But because of this, their speed decreased further, and the cold settled in their bodies began to have a greater effect. One member was stumbling repeatedly. His eyes were half closed, and he was constantly mumbling that he could see warm sand and the sea. The others knew this was a trick of the mind, but the peace on his face was terrifying because often, before death, the body experiences a false sense of warmth. The team leader shook him and told him to stay awake and talk, but his voice had now grown weak. After a short while, he became completely silent, and the body lying on the sledge remained without movement. They had to stop and check his breath, feeling for a pulse with cold fingers, and everyone realized that he could no longer hear them. But there was no time to cry or think while sitting there, because the cold gives no one a chance. With heavy hearts, they started pulling the sledge again, because if they stopped, the rest would end up in the same condition. The wind now seemed a bit calmer, but this meant they had entered the eye of the storm, where there is peace for some time, and then even more terrifying winds return. As the sky cleared slightly, some black spots appeared in the distant snowy field. Someone said hopefully, maybe those are rocks or some structure. Everyone started moving in that direction, but estimating the distance was difficult because in the white field, everything seems close and yet very far. While walking, the sole of one member's shoe broke, and the snow began touching his feet directly. Within a few minutes, his feet went numb. The pain was so intense that tears came to his eyes, but even the tears froze on his eyelashes. They tore pieces of their scarves and tied them around his feet to provide some protection from the cold. But everyone knew this was just buying time. It was an attempt, moving forward. They felt the ground was a bit high at one place. The wind was slightly less there. They tried to take a breath by stopping for a few minutes, but as soon as they sat down, their bodies began to tremble. Muscles started to stiffen, and getting up became difficult. Everyone had to be pulled up again by each other to stand. Now everyone's faces were swollen. Noses and cheeks had turned blue. There was pain in the chest while breathing, and a fast thumping was felt in the head. One member said that he was hearing a strange ringing sound in his ears. This too was a sign of cold and exhaustion. Suddenly, the wind became strong again, as if the storm had returned. Snow began to blow again, and the black spots they were seeing were once again hidden in the mist. Now they couldn't understand if they were going in the right direction, or just moving in circles. But there was no option other than moving forward, because the path to go back had been erased long ago. The body lying on the sledge was now completely still, but they couldn't leave it either, because leaving it meant accepting that they had lost. And even in this state, a hope was alive somewhere within them that perhaps a few kilometers ahead, some rock, some old shelter, or some human sign would be found. And clutching onto this hope, with broken bodies and freezing breaths, they kept moving forward in that white graveyard, without knowing which way the next turn would lead them into even more terrifying conditions. Friends, the situation had now become such that the body was moving only by force of habit. The mind was saying over and over that it wouldn't be possible anymore. But the feet still had to keep moving forward, because everyone knew what stopping meant. The wind had become even stronger again, and the snow was now blowing onto their faces, not just from the ground, but from every direction, as if an invisible wall was trying to push them back. The companion lying on the sledge was now completely still. No movement of breath was visible, but no one was in a state to accept that they had lost him. They kept pulling him, as if perhaps the rhythm of walking itself would make him start breathing again. One member's fingers were now starting to turn black. Upon removing the gloves to look, the skin had become hard and ice cold, but even pain was not being felt, which was even more terrifying because it meant the nerves had stopped working. Another member's nose began to bleed, which froze instantly in the cold. A rattling sound was coming from the chest while breathing, but no one had the time to stop and give medicine or check the condition. Then suddenly, the ground sank slightly again, and the member walking in front got stuck in the snow up to his knees. He tried to pull himself out, but it was as if the snow had grabbed his feet. The other people started pulling him, but the more they pulled, the more the snow kept settling in. Finally, they pulled him out by grabbing him by his bag. Now his legs were trembling completely, and he wasn't even able to stand properly. The number of people walking had decreased further, but the load remained the same. Yet they kept moving forward because there was no way to turn back. Somewhere in the distance, they saw a faint shadow again, but no one was excited this time, because their hopes had been shattered every time before. Still, the human mind is not ready to give up hope, so they continued in that direction. While walking, a loud sound suddenly erupted, as if ice had broken and fallen somewhere. A vibration was felt in the air, and everyone stopped for a moment. They feared a large glacier might be shifting, because if that happened, there would be no chance of survival. But after a few seconds, everything went silent. Still, fear had settled in their hearts. Now every small sound felt like death. One member suddenly started laughing without any reason, in a very strange way. The others realized that his mind was no longer working correctly due to the cold. They tried to quiet him down and engage him in conversation, but there was a strange, vacant glint in his eyes. He kept saying he felt very hot and started opening his jacket. The team leader immediately grabbed his hands and tightened the jacket because everyone knew this is the final stage of hypothermia, where the body begins to feel a false sense of heat. If he took off his clothes, he would freeze within minutes. They now understood that this battle was not just about the path, but also about the mind. Everyone had to fight themselves as well. As they walked, the fuel was almost exhausted. Now they couldn't even stop for long to melt snow. Throats were parched, lips were cracked, and tongues had gone numb. But stopping to drink water was also fraught with danger. Nevertheless, at a spot where the wind lessened slightly, they quickly lit a small stove and drank a few sips of melted snow. But as soon as they sat down, their bodies began to stiffen, and getting up became difficult again. They had to pull each other up to stand. Now everyone's steps were faltering. No one's balance was right. No one could walk straight. A single question revolved in everyone's mind. Are we going in the right direction or just walking on? But no one had the strength left to find the answer to this question. Then suddenly, they sensed a faint smell like smoke in the air again, but clearer this time, as if a machine or a generator was running far away. Everyone looked at each other, and for the first time, a slight spark returned to their eyes. They threw all their remaining strength into that direction. But while walking, one member fell again, and this time he couldn't get up at all. There was no movement in his body. The others kept trying to pick him up, calling his name, slapping his face. But there was no reaction. The cold had now claimed another, had taken him along. But this time, the remaining people didn't even have the strength to put him on the sledge. Yet they weren't ready to leave him behind. They tried to move forward while dragging him, but there was no sledge anymore, only frozen ice and broken bodies. Still, they kept moving forward because now, for them, every step was only in the forward direction. Turning back meant leaving everything behind right there. And in this condition, with half consciousness, broken bodies, and hearts full of stubbornness, they continued forward in that white world. They did so without knowing whether the scent giving them hope would actually lead them to humans, or if this too would prove to be another deception of a mind exhausted by the cold. Friends, the situation had now become such that the two people who remained were swinging between consciousness and unconsciousness. Steps were moving on their own, but the mind would repeatedly sink into darkness. Everything visible in front of them seemed blurry and fractured, but the scent in the air had now become clearer. This wasn't just imagination. It was actually a sign of human activity somewhere nearby. Perhaps of fuel, perhaps of smoke. And clutching onto this final hope, they both kept dragging themselves forward. One member was falling repeatedly. The other would try to pick him up, would fall himself, and then somehow both would stand up again. Their hands were of no use anymore. Fingers had become as stiff as wood. They couldn't even feel pain in their legs anymore, which is the most dangerous sign. But suddenly, through the mist, they saw something like a straight line, then another, then a square-shaped structure. And after a few seconds, they realized that this was not a natural object, but a man-made structure. It was that same old supply depot toward which they had been walking in the dark for so many hours. But even now, the danger wasn't over because their bodies had become so weak that reaching the door felt like a battle. One member collapsed, and this time he couldn't get up. The other kept dragging him, crying, screaming, but the voice wouldn't even come out of his throat. Then, with his last bit of strength, he tried to put him over his shoulder but fell himself. For a few moments, both lay on the snow. Their breathing was heavy, and their hearts were pounding as if they would explode. Then, that member tried to reach the door by crawling on his knees. His glove-covered hand kept scraping against the ice. Every inch was filled with pain, but he didn't give up. Somehow, he grabbed the door handle and pulled with all his might. The door was frozen from the inside, but after a few jolts, it opened and he fell inside. Inside, there was a bit of warm air which, upon touching the body, felt as if it had caught fire. But this very heat was the life-saving. With trembling hands, he tried to turn on the radio kept inside. He dropped it several times, picked it up several times, and finally the signal went through. In a broken voice, he sent a message for help. Then crawling back, he went outside and dragged his companion inside. He closed the door, wrapped both of them in thermal blankets, and tried to light the stove. It took time for the fire to light, but when a small flame burned, tears came to both their eyes, not out of joy, but from the pain arising from the melting of the frost frozen in their bodies. After some time, both lost consciousness because their bodies could no longer endure it. Several hours later, when their eyes opened, they heard the sound of a helicopter. The rescue team had finally reached there. They were immediately taken to the hospital. Doctors said that if they had stayed outside for just one more hour, both their lives would not have been saved. Several fingers had been damaged forever, and there were permanent injuries to the feet, but they were alive. Later, when they were told that the rest of their companions had lost to the cold on the way, both remained silent for a long time, because this victory brought more responsibility and pain than joy. Months later, when they had fully recovered, and a report of this incident was prepared, the world understood that Antarctica does not give humans a chance. It either kills you instantly, or breaks every limit of yours to see how far you can fight. And in this story, the real victory was not that two people survived. The real victory was that, until the last breath, no one sat down and accepted defeat. No one said that enough is enough. Everyone decided to keep moving, whether the body supported them or not. And this is the reason why that mission is still remembered today, not just as a scientific accident, but as an example of human stubbornness and courage. Because in that silence of the ice, they weren't saved by any machine or any technology. They were saved only by a decision that no matter what, they would not stop. And perhaps this decision shows every human the way to stay alive in even the darkest situations.